Oh, this is Roland, or Opa Roland, and he's my neighbor and my honorary grandpa. And I'm interviewing him about his life in Germany in World War II. So the first question is, how old were you when World War II started?
When it started in Europe, that was 1939, I was 9 years old. At that age, I didn't really understand what was going on at all. Now, a year later, 1940, there had been some reports in the newspapers, and of course in the movies they had a reporting with film about the progress of the German troops and so forth. And so then I became aware that this war was going on. And then by the 40s, we lived in Berlin, in a suburb of Berlin, the southwestern area, and its name was Grunewald, which means green forest. And of course, in that part of the country, forests are not green, they're just pines with a dark blackish green and sand soil and very little luxurious vegetation, you know. Bombers came at night, and at that stage they were still not bombing civilian, they were going for some industry northwest in the outskirts of Berlin. But the anti-aircraft was firing all the time. Then they were announced by sirens, so we would go down into the basement of a 4-story apartment building. They fired at the bombers, and the shells exploded and splinters fell to the ground. And a 10-year-old kid, like other 10-year-old kids, collected these shell fragments. And as kids were doing. By 1942, the Air Force had grown considerably, British. I think they were not quite as careful trying to avoid civilians, because in the meantime the Germans had bombed London and had shifted from military targets to just indiscriminately bomb London. They wanted to save those kids from the bombs. The German government arranged to ship whole school classes to southern Germany, in Austria, and away from the bombing. And so 41 into 42, my brother and I were in such school classes, and we lived with the other classes in there was sort of an Austrian hotel in a resort town, and also a religious center. But from a kid's standpoint, it was wonderful. You know, there were no bombs, and there were wonderful mountains and with flowers and so forth, and so hikes, and so that was quite enjoyable. I was lucky. I was sheltered from the worst part of the war all those years. All right, then 1943 comes along. Our family was sort of split up because my father, who worked in a chemistry lab, his lab was moved to another town. My older brothers were in the military or the pre-military, and so it was my mother and my sister and I. So we moved to friends, stay with friends in southern Germany, in the town where I was born, actually. But then 1944 came along, and we had to move to a different location. It was a sort of a pretty sizable farmhouse, more a villa type, northwest of Frankfurt, in the foothills of the mountains there. Germans and the Italians declared war on the United States, being allies of the Japanese. Bombers that came were not only Bomber Command of the Royal Air Force, but they were 8th Air Force of the United States. And they bombed during daylight. But again, where we lived, that wasn't a good target, and so there was no bombing there. But on a sunny day, you could see hundreds of these 4-engine bombers. Well, it was a pretty sight, but the whole sky droned with the engine noise of these. That was 1944, and somewhere between 43 and 44, in that farmhouse, I had the closest brush with the war, and that happened. I think it was in 43. A bomber command had bombed Wiesbaden, and one stray bomber came over our place, and he had some spare bombs. Villa-type house stood on the edge of a hilltop, and maybe it was a moonlit night, so he released his spare bomb or leftover bombs, and 2 or 3 explosives fell into a pasture below the house. It didn't do any harm. And then a bunch of, well, maybe half a dozen or so of incendiary bombs hit the house, the roof, and went through the roof. But these were just lucky. I mean, bombs would just set things on fire rather than explode. So my brother and I went upstairs into the attic and took a shovel and picked them up and threw them out. It was scared, but I don't really remember being scared so much as simply that it did happen, and then we went and threw the incendiary bombs out. When you're that age, you're simply not fully aware of the possibility of death. 45 came around, well, more bombers in the sky, and so then they just flew all over the place, and wherever a train was moving, they bombed it and destroyed the steam engine. The trains in Germany were most all still steam engine pulled. There were some areas were electrified, but not our area. So, well, we saw a few of the retreating German troops, and then Americans came in. In my life directly, it didn't touch me, and we weren't. There wasn't any food shortage in our area, particularly since we lived on this farm. There were fruit trees and so forth, and chickens with eggs and pigs and whatnot. But then we were worried about my father and my 2 older brothers, because didn't know where they were and whether they survived or not. In that year I worked on that farm. Oh, I was cleaning out their stables too. Most of the wagons were still wooden wheels with iron tires, and one was fancily modern with a horse-drawn, but it had rubber tires. So then 1946 came around, and things normalized. The Allies instituted the German government again. Schools opened again, and so 3 years where simply in the morning took the choo-choo train from the village where that farmhouse was, up the hill a ways to a town that had a old castle ruin in it, and there was a high school there. Oh, both of my brothers came back, and my father came back. 1949, I graduated from the high school, and then I was 19. By that time, my father had found a new position with a pharmaceutical firm near the Rhine in a town called Ingelheim. He had found a position there, and so we moved to Ingelheim from that farmhouse near Frankfurt. After some raids on Frankfurt, my mother and I would go out towards the fields in the back of the house, outside the orchards, and there would be flames on the horizon. But, well, what does a 14-year-old make out of that? I mean, it was awesome, but had no real understanding of what it meant.
Can we talk about your immigration to America? How old were you?
I was 19 when I graduated, and then I from the high school, and then we lived in Ingelheim, and I went to the University of Mainz, which was close, go by bicycle or by train. I was studying German literature and language, and English literature and language. The purpose was that the young people who would eventually be possibly running or living in being involved in the local life would come to America and learn about America, and then go back and spread the word how good it is. So I was one of the lucky chosen people. I had learned some reasonable amount of English. Funny to say, but in Italy, because I was traveling or hitchhiking or bicycling in Italy several times during the years, and I met in youth hostels British and New Zealanders and Australians and Americans, and so I just practiced my English. I got with that group, and we traveled, I don't recall how, we traveled to Genoa, Italy, and we got on board of an American steamship, Constitution. And it was the American export lines, and they had two steamers, the Constitution and the Independence, that sailed between New York and Mediterranean ports. So we traveled on that ship. The Fulbright program had arranged so that American families would, the Fulbright quote-unquote scholars would stay with American families for a while before going to the university or college where they were going to spend a year. And so I stayed with a mother and a son in St. Louis, Missouri. And he was, the son was studying music. And then after that, I started this Fulbright year at the University of Chicago. In Ingelheim, there was a girl about my age, a little older, who had been a Fulbright scholar before, had been in that program. And she told me, well, don't put Harvard, Yale, or Columbia, because everybody does, because those were the only ones. She said, I happen to have been to the University of Chicago, and it's a real good one, and so why don't you put that one in? I did, and I ended up at Chicago. I had a wonderful year at the University of Chicago in the English department, and for a change, I learned to work at stuff, because in Germany the medieval type of studying was still widespread, which is to say a big hall full of people and a professor lecturing. So then it was very nice, I wasn't in a hurry to do anything or go anywhere, and it was nice to sit and listen to the lecture, and I guess some of it sank in. I didn't do much in terms of preparation or homework. I got into English department courses at the University of Chicago, and learned to, you prepare for every class, and there's question and answer and so forth, and analysis, and so that did me a lot of good. I traveled back to Germany. This time I think it was the independence, and the independence went from New York, stopped at the Azores, and so I could go, or people, could go on a few-hour trip, walk through the little town there, and see what life on the Azores was like. It's a Portuguese possession, and so there were Portuguese-speaking people there, and they had these cobblestone streets, but most people were barefoot. And then they had the Mediterranean-style houses that don't have an angled roof, but they have the snow go off, but they had a roof with a railing around it and flat on top. And that was unusual, I mean, for someone from Germany. And I remember going down one of those cobblestone streets, and there was a house like that, and there was a dog having its paws over that railing or embankment, and I looked up at the dog, and some of the Portuguese that were walking by said, "Cow, cow," and that is about Portuguese for dog, But then, then we went from the Azores to Gibraltar, and there was a pause there long enough so one could hike up the rock, and a lorry with British soldiers gave us a ride. It was with one of my buddies there from the ship, and we got to see the Alps. The Alps, British English, we call them apes. I had a summer job waiting on tables at the faculty club in Chicago, and the manager told me, well, if you come back, you'll have a job. I thought that was wonderful, because I 24 and I was still drawing my livelihood except for tiny little jobs here and there from my parents and my father. And so that was a wonderful opportunity, and so I grabbed that and came back, got my job at the faculty club, and continued studying English. And then after a while, a year or two later, in a seminar, and at that time I shifted to getting a degree in German literature from Chicago, with the idea of becoming a college teacher in this country. Well, then in one of those seminars, talking about Schiller and so forth, I finally realized I wasn't interested in spending all my life talking about what other people had written, and rather than doing something. And so, back in Germany already, I had at one time thought of going into law, and then withdrawn from it because it would have been a financial burden on my father. For having that, it was a part-time job, and it started out with pay was 65 cents an hour and 2 meals a day. Then I decided to, after getting finishing the thesis and getting a master's degree and so on, that I would go into law school. I mean, I didn't want to have all that literature study without at least some marker, and so I went for the MA, and then enrolled in a law school. That was 1958, and then by 1961 I had graduated. I was at that time still an alien, had a limited choice of jobs, but as a teaching assistant at the law school, I had ranked high enough in the grades so that I was eligible for that, and so I got a one-year job from Bolt Hall, UC Berkeley Law School, and that brought me out to California.
Thank you.
You're welcome.